The Michigan Department of Education's LGBTQ+ Students Project presents Stay Current, Legal and Policy Issues Pertaining to LGBTQ+ Students and School Staff.
So welcome everyone. My name is Kim Phillips-Canope. I'm the project lead for the Michigan Department of Education's LGBTQ+ Students Project. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm going to let my colleagues introduce themselves. Jay, do you want to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Kim. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jay Kaplan. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the staff attorney for the LGBT project at the ACLU of Michigan. And I'm going to turn it over to Lori.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lori Beckhofer. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm with the Michigan Department of Education. I'm the HIV sex education consultant with the department. I'm also the project director on this LGBTQ students project, and it's great to see so many people here.
All right, Katie, you're up.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie. I use she, hers pronouns. I work with Moash, and I'm the project assistant on this project.
All right, so that's all of us. I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen here so that we can get started. Yeah, so this is what we're doing here this morning, and we are super happy to have you. I'm gonna go ahead and move us forward. Something is going on with my screen though. There we go. All right, so we start all of our trainings with a land acknowledgement. So I just want to take a moment to respectfully acknowledge the Menominee, Fox, Anishinaabe, Peoria, Chippewa, or Ojibwe, the Sioux, Mississauga, Odawa, Miami, Potawatomi, and other Native peoples who stewarded the land that we are standing on throughout the generations. We also want to just welcome folks into the space here and to invite you to please take care of your learning needs, whatever you need to do to be able to be present. We totally appreciate that. Just a couple things to keep in mind as we're moving through our time together. The first is that, so this is interactive. We're gonna, invite you to ask questions and to really make this as meaningful for you all as you can. So please be ready for that. And then also just want to let you know that we will be sharing the PowerPoint with you. So you'll have that. You don't need to furiously take notes. And we have a 2-page resource list that we'll be sharing as well. So those you can expect in a follow-up email too. And for those of you who are new to the project, we just want to share a little bit about what we do. A big portion of our work focuses on providing trainings like this. So professional development trainings. We've done them historically in person. Obviously now we're doing them online. And with any luck in the future, we'll be doing them in person again. We also do technical assistance. We've had drop-in support as well offered in an online space. We're hoping to actually find out today if we get funded for a grant that will fund the project for 2 more years and will allow us to do more trainings and more technical assistance and offer that drop-in support again. We worked with the State Board of Education when they passed the statement and guidance on safe and supportive learning environments for LGBTQ students. We'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of this session. And we have a resource guide that's it's in a hard copy right now, but we're moving it into an online space as well to make it more accessible for folks. So that's a little bit about us. Jay, do you want to? I know you introduced yourself. Do you want to say anything more about your work?
Sure. Just very briefly, I also am thrilled that such a great turnout today. And so the ACLU of Michigan's LGBT project has been around for the past 20 years. And most of the ACLUs have well, the National ACLU does LGBT work, but only about a handful of ACLU affiliates like Michigan have their own standalone project to focus on LGBT issues in the state of Michigan itself. And so I'm leaving my phone number, as well as my email address. And should you have issues that come up involving school, always feel free to reach out to me. Thanks.
Great. All right, so that's a little bit about us. We'd love to hear a little bit about you. So we just want to invite you to introduce yourself in the chat box, your name, your role, and if you feel comfortable sharing your pronouns, that would be great. And I'm seeing a message in the chat. I want to make sure that folks know that we do have closed captioning available for this session. So for folks who want it, Katie, is there anything special folks need to know besides that it's available and to use the closed captioning button on their toolbar there, their Zoom toolbar?
The only other thing is that you do have two options. So you can do that kind of live closed captioning, or you can turn on the full transcript, which will kind of take that sidebar where the chat normally is, and it will be more of a running transcript. And it differentiates between speakers a little bit better. So if that's something you need, that is available as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. Sorry, we just want to make sure folks know that that is available for you if you want or need it. So your name and pronouns, if you feel comfortable sharing them, you're also welcome to add them to your Zoom name. And yeah, on a scale of dog, how are you feeling today?
I'm seeing a lot of 8s, Kim.
Well, I feel like it could be worse. I mean, if we were seeing 4s, then I would be more concerned. I feel like I'm kind of between a 5 and a 6 this morning. What about you?
I think I'm a 5.
All right.
I also am very partial to land, so.
All right, that's fair. All right, thank you all for introducing yourself. That's great. We'll take a look at that as we're kind of moving through this. And then we have group agreements that are really as much an opportunity for us to share a little bit about kind of how we approach this work and our framework, as they are about also providing some guidance for us in terms of how we want to interact together. The first is wherever you're at is okay. So we don't come to this with any expectation that anyone has any level of experience or values or beliefs when it comes to working with LGBTQ plus folks. And our job is really just to meet you where you're at and to do what we can to support you so that you can do your best to support your LGBTQ plus students, their families, and your colleagues. No one knows everything, but together we know a lot. This is an invitation for you to bring your own experiences, your own stories, your own, all of that into this space, whether it's by chat or, taking yourself off Zoom and asking questions or bringing situations up. We really want this to be as meaningful for you as it can be. And in order to do that, we need you to really come forward and let us know what do you need support around, what are your questions. Make room for discomfort. Just want to remember that discomfort is not a bad thing, that our greatest learning is when we're in a place of discomfort. That means that we're being challenged. So discomfort is good, and we want to try to kind of lean into that discomfort. If you fall off into panic, let us know. We'll try to rein you back in and help you get back on track. Hopefully that won't happen. Take responsibility for your own learning. Again, this is just an invitation for you to ask questions, to use the chat. And we, in case you can't tell, we have a fairly informal style of presentation here. Please feel free to take yourself off of mute and ask questions. I think in a Zoom setting, sometimes that's harder to do than in person, just like raising your hand, but we really encourage you to take yourself off mute. Again, it's really about just wanting to make it sure that this is as meaningful as possible for you. Delay distractions. We talked a little bit about this. It's hard to do, but really whatever you can do to try to be present for the time that we have together, we would appreciate. And then a few things to reflect on, just remembering that our own experiences, our identities, privileges, biases, all of these things impact who we are, how we see the world, how we move through the world. And we want to just sort of have that present in our mind as we're moving through our time together here. Take note of resistance. There may be times where you're not just feeling uncomfortable with the content or something that somebody has shared, but you really notice yourself like pushing back on it, like you're full on resisting. This is just an opportunity really to notice that and to maybe come to that with a sense of curiosity and wonder, without judgment, but just a little self-reflection about, I wonder what's that about, noticing that and kind of trying to understand that a bit. Be conscious of intent versus impact. We can have really good intentions and still cause harm. And so this is, we want to make sure that if we do cause harm, that folks are, that we're taking responsibility for that, and we're trying to make it right with the folks that we have caused harm with. And on the sort of connected to that, let's remember that we're here to dismantle systems of oppression and not each other. And if you are on the receiving end of being harmed, we would ask that you consider calling folks in instead of calling them out. And if you are the person who's being called in, just remember that that is a gesture of trust and respect. It's about maintaining and staying in relationship with people. And we want to encourage you to receive that as the gift that it is. And then lastly, there's a lot happening in the world for all of us. As much as we can do to take care of each other and love on each other, celebrate, lift each other up during our time here together, I think we could all benefit from that. So thank you very much. That's what we have. Are there any questions about the group agreements or anything that's missing that you want to add to it? All right, we are going to keep going, but you can feel free to bring these back to our attention at any time. These are our objectives for the day. It's really about sort of making sure that folks leave understanding, what are some key laws and court cases, what are the implications of those court cases, and then really thinking about what are the next steps, what are the things that we can do to, with this information to apply it in our school settings to make sure that we're in compliance with the law and that we're doing everything we can to support our students. This is our agenda for the morning. So we're sort of doing our setting the stage bit. We'll be reviewing case law. We'll be looking at the impact of that law. And then again, we're going to be kind of looking at next steps and what we can do with it. And then we'll bring closure to our time here together. I just want to make sure that it's also on our radar that, we are still in a pandemic. We're still in a period and have been pretty much since the founding of our country of racial injustice, and since before the founding of our country, and wanting to just have an awareness that how we are experiencing the pandemic and how we're experiencing sort of the way our society functions is not the same for all of us. And that, the ways that our privileges, our identities privilege us in some ways, that impacts that. And so again, just wanting to be aware that, kind of as we're moving through things, that our students and their families may be experiencing things differently than we are, and that are, sort of trying to open our lens beyond just our own experience, to understand that there are really significant disparities that are existing and have existed and impact all of us. All right, you'll notice we'll have pauses momentarily, sort of as we move through it. It's just an invitation to stretch, take a deep breath, stand up, do whatever you need to do to be present here with us in our time together. So, all right, we're gonna move into like the content now. All right, Jay, I'm handing it over.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Well, I think when we start to talk about education issues, it's important that a lot has changed just in the past couple of years. And the first thing that we want to focus on is a United States Supreme Court decision from last year. And just as a little bit of background, when we look at civil rights laws, only 21 states actually have civil rights laws that explicitly mention sexual orientation and gender identity. Michigan is not one of those 21 states. We're one of the 29 states. And we also don't have federal civil rights legislation or laws that explicitly say sexual orientation and gender identity. So therefore, we have to rely on court interpretations of laws. So last year, the United States Supreme Court, in the case of Bostock versus Clayton County, they looked at a situation involving LGBT employees who were fired from their jobs either because of the fact that they were gay or the fact that they were transgender. And actually, one of the plaintiffs in that case was Amy Stevens, a Michigan woman, a transgender woman who was fired from her job when she disclosed to her employer that she was transgender. And so what the court did was they said, when you discriminate against an LGBT employee because of the fact that they're gay or because of the fact that they're transgender. You're doing it because of sex. It's because of the sex that was assigned to them at birth. In other words, our society, many times when discrimination occurs against LGBT people, it's due to gender stereotyping. You were assigned male at birth, but you are romantically and sexually attracted to members of the same sex instead of members of the opposite sex. Or you were assigned male at birth, and yet you identify as female and you present yourself as female, and that doesn't correspond to my gender perceptions about how someone's supposed to look, act, and dress. And that is a form of sex discrimination. And our civil rights laws do, both in the state of Michigan as well as our federal civil rights laws, they do prohibit sex discrimination. So the impact of this decision is that when in contexts involving employment discrimination against LGBT people, that is sex discrimination in violation of civil rights laws that prohibit that form of sex discrimination. So the impact on this is that LGBT staff in public schools cannot be discriminated against because of their sexual orientation and gender identity. That's going to be sex discrimination. And what we're also starting to see, and we're going to continue to see, is courts applying this decision to other contexts of discrimination. So does this also apply to students in the school setting? Does it apply to housing? Does it apply to public accommodations? And certainly in the realm of education itself. And so this is kind of like our roadmap where we start with this very historic Supreme Court decision.
So we want to, Jay, I don't know if you want to introduce Owen or.
Yeah, okay. I thought there was a next slide coming. I'm so sorry. But yes, and I just wanted to mention very quickly. So I mentioned that courts are looking at this. Our Michigan Supreme Court has a case before them. It's called Rauchworld versus Michigan Department of Civil Rights. And our Michigan Supreme Court is going to be deciding, does the Bostock decision mean that our state civil rights laws that prohibit sex discrimination in all these contexts, does that protect LGBT people? And we should have a decision in that case sometime early next year. And yes, I would be very, very pleased to introduce this next video involving the Michigan Teacher of the Year, who was selected, I think it was last year, right?
It was last year, yeah. He's the
2020. Openly transgender high school English teacher at Oak Park High School, Owen Bandano. And this is a video that he made to kind of talk about his situation.
Thanks.
Hi. My name is Owen Bandano, and I teach 9th grade English at Oak Park High School. I'm the 2020-2021 Michigan Teacher of the Year. I'm also transgender and bisexual. Coming out to my students has radically changed my classroom. I was able to be completely authentic with my students in a way that I never had before. I wasn't living under this oppressive fear that the wrong person was going to discover what I am, and I would be fired for it, or worse. The relationships that I built with my students have been better than ever before. I get to show my LGBTQ students that it's possible to be a successful adult and to be a queer person. I get to show that to my non-LGBTQ students too, who before me may never have met a queer person who's just another adult who cares about them. When I came out, it was still legal to fire someone based on their gender identity or their sexual orientation, so it wasn't something that I underwent lightly. I spent a whole summer consulting with my administration, my union, my school board, and so on. And most of those people seemed really surprised that I felt like I even had to ask. They assumed that their support for me was just sort of a given. But the reality is it isn't. And as a queer person, it's dangerous to assume that it is. Just because someone expresses tolerant views doesn't mean that they wouldn't cave under parental pressure or a panic when they are face-to-face with a queer teacher. You never know who might be harboring queer antagonistic opinions and who might change their tune when children are involved. But the moment that I knew that all of this stress was worth it came about a month into that school year, that first time that I was out. The bell rang at the end of class, and a student was taking her time packing up her belongings, glancing around at the other students, sort of waiting for everyone else to file out. And once they had, when we were alone, she came up to me and she said, "I can't believe you just said you're bisexual." I had to laugh. I am bisexual. She said, "But you said it like it's no big deal." I said, "It's not a big deal." She said, "But you said it like it's normal." I said, "It is normal." She was getting a little bit worked up at this point, and she said, "You said it like you're not ashamed." And I said, "I'm not ashamed." She paused, thinking, and then she said, "I guess I'm still ashamed." Over the rest of the school year, I got to watch this young woman settle into her own skin, make peace with so many facets of her identity, and really start to bloom right before my eyes. She needed to see that she was normal, and that she had nothing to be ashamed of, and that there is a community of people out here in the world who can't wait to support her and love her for exactly who she is. I'm lucky that I am truly supported here in Oak Park, and I wish every teacher could be in a place where they are encouraged to be their authentic selves. After all, that's what we try to do as teachers, too, build students into high-achieving versions of their most authentic selves. It seems to me like that's what we should do and want for all of our teachers as well.
All right. I just feel like it's so great to have an opportunity to hear directly from, from a teacher about the impact that the Bostock decision had. So Owen's fantastic.
I'm always so moved by this, Kim. I mean, I've seen it several times, but it's kind of it's a sign of how far we've come. When in Michigan, their teacher of the year is someone who lives their authentic life and can be their authentic selves in the classroom. And, it also a reminder, it gives you the hope when you see the challenges that still remain.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
So I guess this is me too.
Yes.
So one of the things that, elections do have consequences. And we saw in the previous administration a number of policies that either rescinded protections for LGBT students or interpreted our civil rights laws differently than what the United States Supreme Court did. But when the Biden administration took office on January 20th, the first day President Biden issued an executive order directing all the departments of the federal government to issue policies applying the Bostock decision, including their non-discrimination policies. And so as a result of this, we've seen in terms of the Department of Education issue guidelines, making it very clear that due to the Bostock decision, that LGBT students are protected against discrimination and harassment under the law that's called Title IX, which prohibits sex discrimination. And it provides guidance to school districts on how you apply that. And so it would not only include, discriminatory treatment of LGBT students, but also harassment against LGBT students because of their sexual orientation and because of their gender identity. And what we're also starting to see once again is that the Office for Civil Rights with the Department of Education is now taking these complaints and actively investigating them.
Awesome. Thanks. Did you want to, sorry, I apologize if you've already done this. I didn't know if there were there any cases that you wanted to talk about specifically that are like currently in the system?
Sure. So one of, and thank you for the prompt in the slide too, Kim. So one of the issues that we're seeing is with regarding transgender students. And this is a relatively new issue that's been coming up in terms of teachers or staff who are refusing to address a trans student or gender non-binary student based on their preferred pronouns. Often the staff person is citing their religious beliefs or saying that it's compelled speech to have to do so. But I think the guidance from the Department of Education makes it very clear that when it's a trans student or a gender non-binary student, the refusal to recognize that student, as their authentic self could be in violation of Title IX. And so we're seeing courts trying to grapple with this sort of thing. And some of the cases are progressing. We've gotten some divergent decisions. We have a case in Indiana involving a band teacher at a high school who refused to address by preferred pronouns and then indicated that he would call all the students by their last names, no first names. And what actually happened was he was just really directing the last names to the transgender students. And the court found that the school was justified in terms of reprimanding him for refusing to do so. Then we have a case in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is a federal court decision, but it's a college setting involving a college professor. And the court said that college professor did have a legal claim against the university for terminating his contract. And then we have a case out in Virginia. Some of you might have heard of the infamous Loudoun County, where there's a lot of controversy going on right now about certain curricular teaching. And they're also involved a case including preferred pronouns. So we're going to see courts trying to sort this out. But I do think the guidance provided by the U.S. Department of Education, I think, makes it fairly clear. I mean, it's about respect. It's about according all students the same dignity. And we know that when a person is being misgendered or not being called by their name that they identify with, this can cause harm to the student and can negatively impact their learning environment. And, we're seeing this used as a political issue, of course. A lot of talk about last week in Virginia's governor election where some of these issues have come up. It's not going away anytime soon. And I'm sure this is going to be something that school districts in Michigan are going to have to deal with. The other current litigation we're seeing a lot is in terms of transgender students and the ability to use restrooms in accordance with their gender identity. And what we have seen post-Bostock is pretty much consistency with the court saying, when you deny the trans student the ability to use restrooms in accordance with their gender identity, that this is in violation of Title IX, that this is a form of sex discrimination. And also, because we're talking about public schools, which are considered to be agents of the government, there's a clause in our US Constitution called the Equal Protection Clause that says when the governmental entity discriminates against somebody. And so courts have also found that the equal protection rights of transgender students have been violated. Some of you might have heard about the case involving Gavin Grimm. He was in a high school in Virginia. He's since graduated college. This tells you how long litigation takes. But the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals finally, in terms of, because the case went back and forth to the lower courts, up to the United States Supreme Court, but they firmly held that this violated Title IX and the Equal Protection Clause. And then the school district asked the United States Supreme Court to take up this case, to grant certiorari, and the court refused to do so. So that's kind of like the standing law, for the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. The Sixth Circuit, which covers Michigan, has yet to take up a case like that, but we've seen some consistency with the higher federal courts. They've all been pretty uniform, saying that trans students should have the right to use restrooms, and to deny that is in violation of Title IX.
Awesome. Thank you. I just want to acknowledge that I do see that we have several questions coming in and a really great conversation about Owen coming out in his classroom in the chat, which is great. Some really thoughtful perspectives being shared there. And I don't know if it's helpful. I think I'm going to let you do the next slide, Jay, and then maybe we can come to the questions. I think you might touch on answering some of those questions as you're going.
Yeah, Kim, there's so much in the chat right now.
Yep, I saw the Pride flag one, and that has come up a lot lately.
Yeah, Jay, that's one of my problems. So I'm hoping we double back to that.
Sure.
All right.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about, in terms of transgender students under the Equal Protection Clause and Title IX, and so we just discussed about bathrooms, and that would also include locker rooms, but also the issue about school dress codes. Schools can have dress codes, but they can't. If a transgender student or a gender non-binary student is dressing in accordance with the dress code, but might not correspond to gender stereotypes that a school district would have, they can't be reprimanded for that. Of course, the big issue that comes up a lot is participation in sports for transgender students. We've seen efforts across the country to pass laws prohibiting trans students from being able to do so. We have legislation that was introduced in Michigan. Fortunately, it has not gone any further than a committee hearing in the state Senate. But clearly, this kind of legislation, courts have held that it violates Title IX, and that we would violate the equal protection rights of transgender students. And just as a sidebar, the rationale behind proposed laws like this are based on myths and mistruths about transgender students. Transgender students don't possess some extraordinary athletic ability that's superior to other students just by virtue of their transgender status. There is no, transgender students have been participating in school sports for several decades. There's no showing that their presence in sports somehow creates this unfair competition, that they're taking away slots from cisgender students, or that they're disparately winning medals and first place, in competitions. And this really is a political issue that's being used by certain political groups to try to raise money from their supporters and to kind of gin up the emotional temperature of their base. But what we've seen where there have been legal challenges in courts like in Idaho and in West Virginia and in Tennessee, the courts have been consistent saying that this is discriminatory. Also, intentionally publishing identifying information about a transgender student without their consent, certainly their parents' consent, that could be in violation. Most people who identify as transgender, they've been diagnosed with a condition called gender dysphoria, which is a medical term, which means that your gender identity is incongruent with the gender or sex that was assigned to you at birth. It's medical information, and it's not something that should be shared freely, throughout a school district. And it's not something that everybody needs to know unless the individual and their family chooses to share that information. Issues involving refusing to update school records regarding name and gender. Many school districts, when they have kids registered for school, they rely on the information on the birth certificate, but there's no law that prohibits a school district from recognizing legal name changes that students have, from recognizing the gender identity of a student. And, we deal with that often, including in terms with high school diplomas, things like that. I talked a little bit about refusing to use the name and pronouns for a transgender student or for a student who identifies as gender non-binary. One of the positive things that we've been seeing in the state of Michigan is creating greater access to accurate identity items in the state of Michigan. So 2 years ago, the Secretary of State's office made it much easier for a trans individual to be able to change the gender marker on a driver's license or state ID. You just do that through self-attestation. And today, the Secretary of State's office is announcing at 1 o'clock that they will now provide a third option on driver's licenses and state IDs for those folks who identify as gender non-binary. So that's very exciting. Our Attorney General issued an opinion earlier this summer finding that the requirement that you have to undergo gender reassignment surgery in order to change the gender marker on your birth certificate, that is unconstitutional and it's not enforceable. So now you can get a gender marker change on your birth certificate by just filling out a form and attesting under oath, this is my gender. And birth certificates now in Michigan also provide the third option for folks who identify as gender non-binary. So Michigan, as a result of some of those policy changes, is now one of the leaders in terms of providing accurate identity documents for folks who are transgender and gender non-binary. And of course, what all this, in terms of the Bostock decision, also applies to our school district's notions in terms of, generalizations regarding masculinity and femininity. Anytime someone is being treated unfairly because they don't conform with those notions, that can also be in violation of civil rights laws that prohibit sex discrimination. So I think we're going to, as a result of Bostock, of course, we're going to see more litigation in the context of school issues, and some of these hot button issues, sometimes considered to be part of the culture wars with regards to gender pronouns and using bathrooms and playing sports, and also access to healthcare for transgender youth. I think we're going to continue to see more litigation regarding that, and more attempts to try to use this issue as a political wedge issue. And unfortunately, what makes me so angry is that you're targeting one of the most vulnerable, marginalized groups, transgender, gender non-binary youth, to be used as a political football in this game of tactics. It's really, in my opinion, quite shameful. But I do believe that the law is on our side, and we'll continue to watch closely. We're fortunate that in Michigan, in terms with the sports bill, even if it were to pass, our Governor Whitmore made it very clear that she would veto such legislation.
Right. So I just want to acknowledge there's some really, really great questions that are coming up in the chat. I also we've shared a ton of information that's all really, really powerful and important. I want to give folks, I'm going to break you into groups and give you a few minutes just to talk amongst yourselves about kind of what's resonating for you, what questions are still lingering. Jay and I are going to go through the chat, and we'll be ready to answer those questions when you come back. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And we're going to break you into groups. Dun, dun. All right. So yeah, so we're going to break you into groups. Again, you're just like having an opportunity to kind of debrief with each other, talk about if there's any questions that you continue to have or that have come up as a result of what we've shared. And if there are any kind of like what's coming up for you, what's resonating for you in terms of your work and how this might apply to your work.
Pause here and reflect on what you have learned so far.
So we want to, take some time now to answer questions that are coming up. I know a number of questions have come up in the chat, and we're happy to start there, or we can, if there are things that that sort of came up in your small groups, please, by all means, feel free to bring those forward as well. So Jay, do you want to start with maybe some of the stuff that's in the chat, and folks can
Sure,
jump in?
sure. Maybe we could talk first about the pride flag. So I got a lot of requests for assistance with regards to this issue with school districts this fall. So the question is, I want to show support for LGBTQ students in my classroom, and I'd like to have the rainbow pride flag hanging up in my classroom. And I was told by the school district I can't do so because it's considered to be a political symbol. And can a school district do something like that? Well, obviously people look to the pride flag for many things, but it has some political connotations. And a school district, what they legally can do is they can tell all staff is that we don't allow any political symbols to hang in the classroom, including the pride flag. And the school district has to be consistent about that. I mean, I think sometimes one could even try to make the argument the American flag has political connotations, but I have a hunch that courts will uphold having the American flag in the classroom. But the school district has to be consistent about that. They can't allow other political symbols in other classrooms. Now, what sometimes school districts are mistaken is they think, well, if we allow the pride flag in the classroom, that means we have to allow the Confederate flag in the next classroom, or some anti-LGBT flag. And that's not the case. So in other words, in addition to saying no political symbols, in any classrooms, a school district can also decide these are core values for our school district. And if we really believe in diversity and supporting LGBT students, that we will, as part of our statement, as part of our speech, we will allow this symbol to be in the classroom. So it's been successfully advocated in some school districts to have a pride flag because it's the school speech. It's not the individual teacher's speech in terms of political speech in the classroom. And we've seen that also with the Black Lives Matter flag, school districts deciding, you know what, this is important to us, so we're going to allow this symbol to be in the classroom. So there's two ways to approach it. There's the one in terms of what you're saying, no political speech on behalf of staff. We're going to be consistent, across the boards in terms of in our classrooms, and or the school district can say, we're going to allow this because this is our school district speech. This is one of our core values. And so we've been trying to advocate that with school districts. We haven't been too successful yet, but I think there is an argument that they can allow this. Do they have to? No, they don't have to allow that, as long as they're consistent about the political symbols, such as, not permitting any other flags except the American flag to be in the classroom. I hope I provided some guidance with that.
Thanks, Jay. We also had a question come up. We have a question that just came up in the chat that I want to, if it's okay with you, I'll take on, about the MyFi. For people who are not familiar, the MyFi is the Michigan Profiles for Healthy Youth survey. That survey has been used by districts for many years, pretty much without incident, actually, for a very long time. And the survey, it's a great survey because it provides you both building and district level data, so you can get really specific information about your students. And it not only provides information about risk factors, it provides information about protective factors. So things that are like really helping your students. So you get some really good data. This past year, in the demographics section, we added a question that allows students to identify as transgender. Our MyFi, we try to have aligned with the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which is the statewide survey that we do, so that we have similar sort of fields in both surveys. And there are districts, there's some districts that are getting quite a bit of pushback now on using the MyFi because this one question has been added. And so I just want to, I understand that there is pushback that's happening. I understand that there are some concerns that are being raised. And I want to make sure that folks are aware of sort of what the data does and why it's important to use the MyFi survey. We certainly recommend that districts use the survey in addition to having really good information about your students so that you know what services and supports they need. It also, having that data allows you, there are like grants and things like that you have to have MyFi data in order to apply for. So it gives you access to additional resources that your district wouldn't be able to access if it wasn't for that. Some of the concerns that come up are, like, oh, if you ask a student if they're transgender, like they're too young, they shouldn't be asked this information. It's like very personal. Nobody should be asking my kid that information. I just want to be really clear that asking a student on a question that's optional, by the way, students are not required to either fill out the survey at all, or parents can opt them out of the survey and a kid can just skip that question. But just asking the question does not actually make anybody transgender. It doesn't make them question their gender identity. This is just a question. And the question itself causes no harm. But I just want to make sure that folks are aware of that. If you need, if your district is one of those getting pushback and you would like some support around kind of how to address that, definitely feel free to follow up with us afterwards. We do have some resources that may be, and some like talking points that may be helpful in terms of why the MyFi is so valuable and how to respond to those concerns.
Sure. And just to add to that, Kim, I mean, it's so important to have survey information that reflects the diversity of all students and to make sure that the needs of all students are being met, and to try to pretend, to deny the existence of transgender students within the school district. And the irony I find about that is some of the same people who would oppose that kind of survey question would also be the ones who would support legislation that would prohibit transgender students from being able to play sports. In other words, they would recognize the existence of trans students for purposes of that legislation, but not for purposes of the survey where you're trying to address the educational needs.
That's great. Thank you. There are other questions that have come up in the chat, but I just want to pause and see if there are any questions from you all, if anybody wants to bring up that are not necessarily in the chat. We've got those in writing. We can kind of go back and forth.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have
That's okay.
a student at my door right now too, but I think this is in the chat, but we are getting a lot of pushback about students under the age of 14 and needing parent consent to, you know, call students by their preferred name, and also bathrooms and locker rooms that we have to have parent consent before we can allow that. So I just wanted to know at some point if you guys could speak to that, that would be great.
We're going to speak to it now because it
Yes,
comes up all the
absolutely.
time. And, you know, I wish I could tell you there's just this, you know, this model answer that just fits it. But the thing is, you have two things that are kind of hitting against. You have the legal issue of parental autonomy. In other words, the right of parents to make decisions for their own children, which is constitutionally protected. And then, of course, you also have the well-being of the student that you are trying to educate and wanting to make sure that they're being provided a supportive learning environment. And we also know that when parents are not supportive of transgender kids or LGBT kids, that this can create a lot of problems for kids. Sometimes it can put them in harm's way. So by law, no, you're not required to have parental permission to address a student in accordance with their, you know, their preferred pronoun or preferred name. But it's probably a good idea if a student says, you know, I'd like to be called this. This is how I identify, to maybe have a conversation with that student if they have spoken with their parents about it, if they do have support at home, if they have some concern, if, you know, that their parents even know about something like that. And then to make a decision in terms of what's really in the best interest of that child at the school. We always want to encourage school districts, if they can have a conversation, if the student is, you know, feels that they're, you know, they're willing to have their parents to be part of the conversation about this issue, to try to do so and to provide them with support and information. So hopefully they will be supportive of their LGBT child. But in certain circumstances where the school district, you know, has determined that there is going to be harm to this child being in school, if they're not referred to accordance with their preferred names and pronouns, and they're, you know, and they're not getting the support at home, then a school district can make that decision. It's really a balancing act, but there's not a requirement. And I wouldn't, you know, the other thing is, even kids, even young kids, have a privacy interest in terms with regarding their sexual orientation and gender identity. It's not that everything, you know, keep it a secret from the parents, but if you have a conversation with the child and it's very clear that they don't wish to have their parents know about this, or that there's concern that they might be harmed if that information is shared with the parents, then that should not be shared. But it really is gathering facts, looking at the situation itself, trying to see if there's a way to maybe bring in parents so that they can be supportive. What I've heard a lot of times, what happens is you'll hear from a particular parent saying, I don't want my child, I don't want you to use these preferred names and pronouns. I'm not going to be supportive of this sort of thing. And court cases, we've seen parents threaten to sue school districts if you go against my wishes, but we really haven't seen in terms of court decisions or consistency in terms of in the law of what the courts are going to say on this issue. But you're dealing with these two things, the parental autonomy with also looking out for the safety and support of the student that you're working with. But in general, there's no law that requires that a school that in a middle school that you have to have permission from the parents to do so. But certainly would encourage the conversation with the student to see if they feel that this information, have they talked about it with their parents? Do they have that support? Could they maybe have a conversation with somebody with school, on this issue, and this just really weighing the different concerns.
And I'll just add to that a little bit. There's some sort of additional questions about it happening in the chat. And I just want to say, you know, we've worked with Jay, who's amazing. We've also had this conversation many times and trained with Troon Law Firm, which is a law firm that represents most districts in the state. And they've been really clear that if as a district, you're acting in the best interest of the student, that you're on very firm legal ground. And we have a lot of research that has been referenced a little bit in the chat here that shows that when we use the name and pronouns that students go by, that it mitigates some of the risk factors that they may be experiencing around things like anxiety, depression, suicidality. And so you have some really good information that shows that you are acting in the best interest of the student when you're using the name and pronouns they go by. It also aligns with Title IX. So you've got some like firm, you know, legal guidance there as well. I'll also say that in addition to, I guess, two other things. One is that the State Board of Education, that statement and guidance that we talked about, talks about using the name and pronouns that students go by. We'll share that in that 2-page resource list that'll be in there. And it is probably already your practice to use the name and pronouns that students ask you to go by. My guess is that it's not only transgender students that are using a name that's different than what is their legal name. And that as a district, I have yet to come across a district that, you know, if you have a kid whose legal name is Robert, but they go by Bob, that the district says, well, I can't call you that until I get permission from your parents. So I'm gonna get that, and then I'll let you know if I can call you Bob. We just say like, oh, you go by Bob, great. And we like make a note on our roster and we write Bob above Robert, so that we know as a teacher to refer to that student by the name that they go by. And if you're treating your transgender students differently than you're treating any other students, then you're outside of your practice. So I just want to name that, like, this is not a new thing to call a student a name that's different than the legal name that they go by.
Right.
So hopefully that helps. And it helps too with the question about like if parents say no, that we really, as Jay said, we encourage you to do everything that you can to sort of be the bridge between the student and the parent. There is nothing that prevents you from using the name and pronouns that a student goes by, regardless of if the parent is supportive. And it is, we've got a lot of information that shows that it's both best practice and it's in the best interest of the student to do that.
Thanks, Kim. That's so helpful. And I realize that what the school district is thinking, you know, will we get sued? You know, and even if we have do have a legal ground to stand on, it's going to cost the school district money, and we want to try to avoid that at all costs. But you really need to look at the bigger picture and what this means, you know, for the student itself. Your duty is not solely to you know what the parent thinks or what they want. It's looking out for the welfare of their children. And we know that, you know, in terms of, what is it, 40% of all homeless youth identify as LGBT. I mean, that's on the extreme side, and we also know, you know, the risk of, as Kim mentioned, for suicide and suicidal ideation as a result of not getting that support.
Mm-hmm. I also saw a question in the chat earlier about pronouns and what to do when students are using different pronouns on different days, or they're changing pronouns on a fairly regular basis, and how do we navigate that? There were some good suggestions in the chat about that. I also want to mention that there are some tricks and tips that teachers have worked out with students to make it easier for them to sort of let the teacher know what pronouns they're using on a given day. So like we have some students who might wear a button that says what pronouns they go by, and they might change that button from day to day. We also have students in a more sort of, I guess, less conspicuous way, they have like a 3x5 note card that is one color on one side and one color on the other side, and they'll put that card on their desk, and whatever color is up, then that's an indication to the teacher about what pronoun they're using on that day. And you know, this is like a system that's worked out with the teacher ahead of time so that everybody's kind of on the same page. But there are, you know, it is true that we want to encourage students to remember that, you know, as adults, we might make mistakes, and we're trying, and we're, you know, like we're working on it. And I also want to make sure that we're not putting it entirely back on the student. There are things that we can be doing as the educators to make sure that we're trying to adapt to meet the needs of our students. And so talking it through with your student to say, you know, I really want to get this right. is there a system we can figure out that would help me so that I don't want to misgender you on any given day? And you can kind of talk that through with them and maybe work out a system together that will work for that particular student. But it's sort of a both and. So like, we're working on it, we're going to make mistakes. How can we work together to make fewer mistakes? All right, what other questions do folks have? And again, I'll invite folks to take yourselves off of mute while we're digging through the chat to see what else we've missed here. And if we missed something in the chat, yeah, please let us know. Go ahead, Jay, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I just was noticing people still up to that issue of the naming. You know, it's that many times staff feel that they need the support of the administration and they don't always have that, like, you know, the situation involving that other school district. And, you know, as you mentioned, sometimes talking to the school district attorney, if they're knowledgeable with regards to this issue, will provide them with guidance. You know, the whole temperature and stuff with school board meetings and things as of late, you know, we're hearing these stories of how political things are becoming, and school districts are getting very scared, you know, about any, you know, potential form of controversy. But this is all about being supportive of the student.
Mm-hmm. And I want to acknowledge too, like, it absolutely, having the support of your administration makes a huge difference. And for the administrators out there, this is a place where you can really step into leadership and make sure that even if you know, like, that you're supportive and you would want this to happen, if your staff doesn't know that you want that, you really want to make sure that you're communicating that to your staff so they're really clear that, all right, my administration understands this in the same way that I do, and yeah, and so we can move forward with this, and we're ready to sort of deal with any pushback that we get. And, you know, we are recording this, and if it would be helpful to share this recording with your administrators after the fact, by all means, please do that, and know that we're here to support you beyond just, you know, this 90-minute period. If you have situations that come up where you need to talk something through, we're happy to be there as a resource in that way as well. We do that often with many districts, and this is a very common question, probably the most common question that we get, that schools are trying to navigate. So please know that you're not alone in kind of working through these issues.
Right. And sometimes it even includes, you know, providing supportive materials to a student, you know, a book or something to read. We've seen that come up, or even just sharing resources with a student in terms of for support for either their gender identity or sexual orientation.
Yeah. What other questions do folks have? I
think, Kim, there was about in terms of with school records and.
Oh yeah, great, right. Student information systems. Jay's nemesis.
But I love always turning over to Kim.
So first, I just want to make sure that folks are aware that we did an entire training on student information systems that is recorded and available, that goes through the most common student information systems that are out there, how they can be adapted and used to make sure that they're meeting the needs of your transgender and non-binary students, or for all of your students, regardless of their gender identity, really. So I think, let's see, some things to think about. And if you have a specific question about student information systems, like your system or something like that, let me know. But in talking to both the companies that have created these student information systems, whether it's, I'm going to forget the names of them, but I know PowerSchool is a big one. Yeah, the rest of them just like totally flew out of my brain, but almost all of them that we're aware of have the option of adding fields that allow you to include both the legal name, which we know at this point you need for state reporting purposes, and a name that a student goes by. Several of them are adding gender marker and pronoun fields. I mean, you have a gender marker field, but they're adding pronoun fields that allow students to include in the student information system what pronouns they go by, so that folks have that as well. Again, same as with sort of the name that students go by, like in a classroom, you do not need, there's nothing in the law that requires you to have parent permission to add the name a student goes by into that. It might be called a preferred name, it might just be called name. Some call it name and then have legal name, whatever that field is, to have the name the student goes by in that field, so that that's what comes up on rosters and things like that. One of the questions that is common is like, oh, if I put it in the roster field, it also shows up in the transcript. It also shows up in the report card. It's going to show up in communications to the home. That's a conversation you want to have with the student to make sure that that would be okay with them. To kind of talk through, like, if we change it here, it will also show up here. Is that what you want? Is there another way we can make sure that your name, the name that you go by, is used without potentially outing you to your family? Things like that, if that's not a safe thing for a student to have. If there's a specific question about student information systems, please let me know, and I'm happy to answer that. But it is absolutely okay to use your student information system in that way. And I would recommend, there's a great, that video is a great resource. It also includes the Q&A document that people had. We had a lawyer from Troon who was on that webinar with us answering questions. And there's a 2-page resource list that goes along with student information systems specifically. And I see you have your hand up. I don't know if it's about student information systems, but I want to make sure to.
It was a different question, so
great.
Feel free
That's fine too.
I've had increasing need of administrators asking for exactly what we're presenting on today, and that is like the legal backing for some of this.
Mm-hmm.
And while your guys' training, I think, is super informative and super helpful for us to understand this, I don't always feel super comfortable passing this along, because as a social worker therapist, my area of expertise is mental health and not legal stuff. I can't speak with the same authority as Jay can, and I'm concerned about administrators. I can't give legal advice. So I'm always concerned about how I share this information or how I disseminate this information. So, I mean, I don't know, thoughts or ideas about that? Thanks.
Yeah. I mean, sharing the recording of it, then it's like not on your shoulders. You can just say like, hey, I attended this training and there were these people who had, were explaining the law. That might be helpful. We are not sharing legal advice with you. Well, I'll say I am not sharing legal advice with you. I'm not an attorney. That's not my background. And the information that we're sharing with you is, information that we've done a lot of research on to make sure that what we're talking about is legally sound, that it aligns with the law, it aligns with case law, things like that. Jay is obviously an extremely skilled and capable attorney with expertise in LGBT law. But sharing the recording is certainly something that you can do. And you can always put it off on us and say, this is what I heard. I don't know if you want more information, but there's this recording. Here's a resource list. Here's the contact information. You can put us in contact with your administration and say, that's a way of sort of introducing us to them, and they can ask questions directly. Sometimes that's really helpful to have somebody else make the connection, so it doesn't feel like we're like coming in, like telling people what to do and are like, you're breaking the law kind of thing. Yeah, Jay, I don't know. Do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, many times these school administrators, hopefully they're not, trying to they're not trying to make up the law. They're consulting with their attorneys, that represent the school district. What I have found sometimes when I write a letter to a school district, if the law is not absolutely clear, or if a case hasn't been specifically decided in Michigan, sometimes the pushback, well, we don't have to follow it. But I think, an argument can certainly be made that even if a court hasn't addressed that in Michigan, we can look to other courts to see how they have done things to provide guidance. And we can certainly make those arguments based on interpretation of other laws. But, sometimes there is just going to be that kind of resistance. And sometimes that's coming from their attorneys. I dealt with the school district regarding the issue of bathroom use. And basically the answer I got back was, well, no case has been decided in Michigan, so we don't have to follow what other courts have done here. And we don't have to, do the guidance from here yet, and stuff like that. So there's always going to be that kind of resistance, but you can always, refer the issue to myself. Happy to reach out to them. Happy to have that conversation with their attorneys, with regarding the interpretation of the law.
I'm noticing the time. I'm going to sort of press pause on questions because I want to make sure that we get to just a couple more slides that kind of talk about the State Board of Education guidance that may be, because that's maybe a really helpful resource. And then we can answer more questions as we have time. And I'll give you a little breather, Jay, in case you want to look at the chat for more, for more questions. All right. So, so again, this is our coming back to kind of what's happening at the state level, wanting to make sure that folks are aware that, and Jay's talked about, I think you've talked about all of these things at this point, Jay. I was just going to mention the State Board of Education guidance, and also just mentioning that the Department of Ed, that what we're talking about here also aligns with the work that we're doing at the Department of Ed and our strategic plan. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. I just want to acknowledge that this is supported. This is work. It's a Department of Ed project, and this is work that's supported by the Department of Ed beyond just the project itself. And then I also want to just spend a couple of minutes just letting folks know what's in the State Board of Education guidance. We reference it quite a bit. It was passed in 2016, in September of 2016. So it's been around for a bit of time. And despite the changes in sort of case law, which have for the most part been very supportive and positive around LGBTQ plus issues, the guidance is still aligns with the law. The law firms that represent districts are still referencing this and using this as a resource. So it is not legal in the sense that the state board can't say like you're required to do these things. These are recommendations, but they are best practice recommendations, and they are supported by federal law and by state, the current interpretation of Elliott Larson and state law as well. So the guidance is broken down into two parts. The first section is all about sort of overall recommendations for LGBTQ plus students and creating an inclusive space for our LGBTQ plus students kind of across the board. So some of those recommendations are around making sure that your policies are inclusive. For the most part, most districts in the state work with Neola to develop their policies or to adopt their policies. Neola, we have worked with Neola also, and their like non-discrimination and anti-bullying policies are inclusive when it comes to sexual orientation and gender identity. So that's a really positive thing. So most districts actually do have inclusive policies. You might not know that. And so looking at your policies might be a good starting point. And then you can also talk to your administration about, if you do have inclusive policies, making sure that the practice aligns with the policy that you have. Providing professional development opportunities. We haven't talked about GSAs or gender and sexuality alliances, but these student support groups are huge. They are helpful not only for LGBTQ plus students who are involved in them, they're also helpful for students who are not involved in the GSA, regardless of their gender identity and sexual orientation. Schools where GSAs exist, students across the board report the school climate being safer and more inclusive and less bullying. So that's huge for everybody. Making sure that you're working with families. We've talked quite a bit about this, not just families who have LGBTQ plus students, but also families that are headed by LGBTQ plus people. And making sure that your school culture is inviting for everybody. Making sure, number 5 is really about making sure that we're looking at our curriculum and what are the ways that we can be addressing and including age appropriate, content specific LGBTQ plus content into our curriculum. This idea of windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors, making sure that our students see themselves reflected in the curriculum, that they have opportunities to learn about other identities, and these sliding glass doors are those sort of entry points that we can move into and understand the experiences of folks who have different identities than we do. Making sure that your library has holdings that are inclusive of LGBTQ plus characters and stories. Number 7, collect and review data. This really gets back to the MiFi and what we talked about earlier. There are other surveys as well that you can look at. GLSEN has a great school climate survey, but providing opportunities for your students and families to share feedback about what their experiences are in school so that you know, you're not just guessing, but you actually know. And then having a staff person in your school building or in your district that's kind of the go-to person when it comes to LGBTQ plus issues. You don't have to have all the answers, but somebody who's willing to kind of inform themselves and then help support other people. The second half of the document focuses specifically on transgender and what we at that time called gender nonconforming people, what now we call gender expansive, gender fluid, genderqueer students. And this half of the document is broken down into these different sort of areas: student identity, names and pronouns, records, privacy, and then looking at sort of the spaces where we segregate students by gender, which we really shouldn't be doing unless it's absolutely pedagogically necessary in a classroom setting, just for the record, and dress codes, which I know have also come up. This is not like prescriptive. It's not like, prescriptive isn't the right word. It's not doesn't provide all the detail that you need to know, but it does provide guidance and a really important starting point for kind of how to handle these situations. And we are always available again to, to be a resource to help you through any situations that are coming up. Are there any questions? I just wanted to make sure we got through that piece of things before we brought an end so that folks know of this like really great resource that is available. I'm going to stop sharing again here and just check in and see if we have any questions that haven't been answered yet. We've got just a few more minutes here. So please.
One thing, Kim, I saw in the thread is that sometimes the pushback that staff and school districts get, why are these special rights for these LGBT kids with the things with the GSA and in terms of sports and bathrooms and stuff? But it's not about special rights. So in other words, the GSA is talking about non-curricular clubs, and the law applies equally to other non-curricular clubs. And in terms of using restrooms, it's about all students cisgender students using restrooms in accordance with their gender identity. It's about equal access to school programs. It's not creating special rights. It's providing the same opportunities to LGBT students. I think that's really important, and certainly the way that you want to respond to that question. It's not creating any special privileges or special advantages that you're giving to LGBTQ students. It's providing them with that same dignity and the same support that hopefully all students are being provided with.
Mm-hmm. And to sort of build on that, I see Stephanie's question about or comment about GSAs. I think in some spaces, naming, your student club should be named by your students. It's a student-led club, and so you want to make sure that your students have an opportunity to choose the name of the club that fits for them, that they feel like is the most appropriate. We have GSAs use lots of different names. Certainly not every GSA uses GSA as their name. We have lots of student clubs that are called diversity clubs, that are called, Rainbow, Spectrum, the Social Justice Club. There are lots of names that would be appropriate. I would absolutely encourage you to leave the naming of the club up to the students who are a part of that club, because it is a student-led club and they're going to know best what's the right name for them.
Yeah, and actually the courts have supported the right to be able to name your own club. And a school district can't say, you can't have gay in the word. We're going to call it the Rainbow Club or the Diversity Club. That's protected also under the First Amendment.
Pam, what I was trying to address is that I've been contacted. People were trying to disguise the fact that it was a GSA in order to try to hide it from their administrators, which I said that's not a good idea. I'm not saying they can't name it whatever they want, but trying to purposefully conceal the purpose of the club in terms of it being diversity and inclusion further perpetuates the stigma. And I felt like it also puts everybody in a bad space because the effort is to deceive. And if the intent is to deceive, I did not think that was a good idea. That's what I was trying to say, Kim.
I understand. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think it's an important question. I think if you're in a district where the administration is not supportive or is openly hostile toward LGBTQ plus students, that I can understand students saying like, we need a space where we can come together and we are supported and feel safe together. And if we do that in a public way, then we are going to be punished or treated, differently, or, harm could come to us. I can also understand students, the perspective of students sort of feeling like it wouldn't be safe for us to come to the administration in that way. So I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer to it, but I think I can sort of see both sides to what you're saying. And yeah, it's a difficult situation in spaces where students are, where they're either being harmed by the administration, or that it's a hostile or toxic environment for our LGBTQ plus students. It's really challenging.
I see a question just really quick, Kim.
Mhm.
How do you answer questions about biological males identifying as female when they clearly have an advantage in sports? And I think once again, that's not necessarily based on actual fact. Individuals have skills, regardless of what gender was assigned to them at birth. No, there's not an automatic advantage. And to term somebody who identifies as transgender as solely biological male, there are biological components, chromosomal components of one's gender identity as well. And so we try not to use that kind of language when describing somebody who's transgender. We go in accordance with their gender identity. We can say that they were assigned male at birth, but I think that's simply not true, that automatically that they have athletic advantages over cisgender students. It really depends on the sport. It depends on the individual. And that, when we make an assumption like that, of course, that would support, the prohibitions on transgender students from being able to participate. But we have to look at the actual medical and scientific facts. So if someone was to make a statement like that, we would want to provide them with information showing that trans kids have participated in sports for decades, and there doesn't, the studies show that there is not this unfair competitive advantage. The transgender kids are not, winning every competition and not taking away slots from cisgender students. I mean, we don't say that if someone has a stronger athletic ability between two cisgender people, that somehow they have an unfair competitive advantage. So I think we just want to break it down in terms of facts and science.
Thank you so much, Jay. I'm just noticing the time. I want to make sure that folks have what they need in terms of like sketches and things like that for your being able to bring closure to your time here. I wanted to make sure to give folks a chance to think about like, what is one thing that you want to do as a result of this training, and we have officially recorded all of our trainings at this point, and they're all going to be available online and through our training calendar, which is where everything is posted. So you'll be able to share any of our trainings with any other people. I'm very excited about that. And then we just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us for this important work that you're doing, and for allowing us to take up an hour and a half of your morning to share time and space together. And I just also want to reiterate that if you have additional questions that come up, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're so happy to be a resource in whatever way that we can to help answer questions and kind of navigate some of these difficult situations that folks are facing and trying to work through and support your students, and also make sure that you're doing things lawfully. We really appreciate all your efforts. Jay, do you want to say anything else?
No, I just want to thank everybody for participating and for wanting to be a supportive educator for LGBTQ students. And we are here as a resource to support you in that work. And don't let this be the last time that we've had these discussions. Always feel free to reach out to myself and to Kim and Lori.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll stick around. I don't know if Jay, if you have a few minutes to stick around, if there are unanswered questions that folks want to make sure get addressed, feel free to stay after. But everybody who doesn't want that, you're free to go. We're officially done. Have a great rest of your day. All right. Are there any questions that folks are still holding that they wanted? Anybody sticking around to ask a question?
I have a question about the transcript, high school transcript.
I'm thinking they can't do this, but I just want to make sure. I have a student that graduated a year or two ago and finally was able to legally change his name. So now he wants me to go back and change his high school transcript. I'm thinking I can't do that because it was back then, but maybe I'm wrong.
You absolutely can do that.
Oh, I can.
And you should, because
Okay.
if you're not changing that, then you could be violating that student's FERPA rights by outing them as being a gender that's different, going by a different name and gender than they actually go by. So yeah, you absolutely should change it. And
Okay.
even if they hadn't legally changed their name and they come back and request that you change their transcript to reflect the name that they go by, it is absolutely appropriate to still change their transcript to reflect that.
And do I have to like put anything in their C60, or I could just, what do they have to just show me their driver's license, or how does that work? I don't know.
That would be a local, if it's their legal name, I mean, they could show you information. Basically, as long as the student is acting in good faith, like if you have a reason to think that they're like trying to scam you or something, then it would be appropriate to try to like get a little bit more information. But if the student is acting in good faith, coming back to you and saying, this is who I am, this is how I identify, then it would be appropriate, and you can just go by their word to change their name.
So even from years ago, so it's okay that he's, okay, cool. I'm thinking maybe you might want to put that out there somewhere, because when we did our separate chats, nobody knew. So I'm thinking a lot of people probably aren't sure, because I was thinking to myself, when I got married, I couldn't go back and change I thought I can't go back and change my high school transcript. So that was my line of thinking. And I think a lot of people are really confused about that, but that would be great to know.
Sure.
Okay.
I think the rationale, Nicole, as Kim mentioned, if someone's applying for college or has to share their transcripts, because that can out them as transgender, that would be the distinction between, someone who is married, has changed their name through marriage subsequent.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. That's great.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I appreciate the question.
Is it correct that there are no legal ramifications for using a student's chosen name and pronouns, even without parental consent?
In general, yes. But I think the whole idea, it's, in terms of you've made a determination, this is in the best interest of the student, and efforts to have a conversation with the parents on this issue, because if they do try to go into court and they argue about their parental autonomy, as long as the school has shown that we made a determination that this is in the best interest of that student. I would never want to say, okay, if a parent says, no, I don't want this, the school district say, well, we're not going to listen to you, we're just going to go ahead. You want to have a situation where you've really made a thoughtful decision why you need to move forward, even without the parent's permission and consent.
Okay. And I'm not sure what the age of the student is, with younger students, it's parent involvement might look different than with older students. So, that's something to keep in mind also.
Do you have any advice about how to support students through the process of changing their chosen name, especially those who change it multiple times?
So I just want to sort of normalize that as a student is kind of coming to understand who they are, which is developmentally appropriate, that they're like coming to understand, especially in adolescence, that's their job, is to figure out who they are, how they identify, who they're attracted to, like who they want to be in the world, who they know themselves to be in the world. And, the name you go by is very, very personal. And when you're in the process of kind of thinking about who you are and how you want to be referred to, a young person it may take some time to kind of land on something that really feels like, this is the one, this is who I am. This is the name that really resonates for me. And that may take some time. In terms of supporting the student, I think checking in with them, asking them, what support they need, what they want, how you can be a resource to them, talking through any issues that you may anticipate coming up. How do you want us to handle it if, somebody on any given day maybe uses the wrong name or uses the wrong pronouns? where do you want us to use these name and pronouns, or these names and pronouns? Do you want us to use them in class? Do you just want to know? You want us to know? Do you want, others to know? How do you want us to handle that? In what situations do you want us to use these names and pronouns? The gender support plan is a really, really fantastic resource that can be really helpful for schools in terms of kind of thinking ahead about what students may need, and kind of how to navigate things so you don't feel quite so like you're on your heels, quite so reactive. I just dropped a link to a gender support plan in the chat, so that you can kind of see what that looks like. They can certainly be adapted based on your school and situation, but it can be a really, really helpful tool for supporting transgender, non-binary students as they're kind of navigating the school system and school activities and things like that.
Thank you for watching. Sharing this video with colleagues or friends is strongly encouraged.